Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on ESTCP funding opportunities for post-remediation performance assessment. My name is Deanne Ryder, and I will be moderating today's session. We will get started in a few moments. While we wait for others to log on, I would like to cover a few logistical items. Today's broadcast will be listen only. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. You may submit questions by using the chat box in the lower left-hand portion of the screen. You need not wait until the Q&A period to submit your questions. In fact, we encourage you to submit them in advance of that session. The phone lines will remain listen only throughout the presentation, so we will not be taking any questions verbally. We will not be able to answer questions about specific proposal ideas or technologies during this webinar. If you run into any technical difficulties involving the presentation or call-in line, please contact the ReadyTalk technical support as noted in the meeting confirmation email. Please note that both the audio and the presentation of today's session will be archived on our solicitation webpage in case you would like to refer to them in the future. Today's speaker is Dr. Andrea Leeson, the CERTIP and ESTCP Deputy Director and Program Manager for Environmental Restoration. Before I turn it over to Andrea, I remind phone participants that this is a listen-only session, and to submit questions, please use the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. Andrea?
Thank you, Deanne. And as Deanne said, thank you for joining our webinar on the FY15 Post-Remediation Performance Assessment Solicitation. We run two programs from our office. We have CERTIP, the Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program, which primarily funds science and technology projects, as well as ESTCP, the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program, under which we fund technology demonstrations and validations. The drivers that guide our research and demonstration investments can be grouped into two broad categories. The first one is the reduction of current and future liability, under which we address contamination from past practices, as well as pollution prevention to control life cycle costs. Under contamination from past practices, we address issues associated with contaminated groundwater, soils, and aquatic sediments, our UXO liability, as well as the emerging contaminants. The solicitation we're discussing today is focused on those issues associated with contamination from past practices in our groundwater and aquatic sediments. Also driving our research and demonstration investments is the sustainability of our ranges, facilities, and operation. And this includes issues associated with maritime sustainability, threatened and endangered species, UXO and their associated munitions constituents, installation energy, toxic air emissions and dust, noise, as well as climate change. CERTIP and ESTCP are managed jointly with 4 program areas under CERTIP. Those are the weapons, systems, and platforms, resource conservation and climate change, munitions response, and environmental restoration. Under ESTCP, we have 5 program areas with the addition of energy and water. The solicitation today is focused on issues that are addressed under the environmental restoration program area. The goal of both programs is to ultimately meet the needs of the DoD user community. Under CERTIP, we identify high-priority environmental S&T investment opportunities, and we fund fundamental research through advanced technology development. Under ESTCP, we frequently capitalize on these past investments under CERTIP in order to transition the technology out of the lab and into the field, thereby promoting implementation. So today we will cover a new solicitation released fairly recently on post-remediation performance assessment. Proposals are sought for follow-up monitoring and evaluation of in-situ restoration sites as candidates for funding beginning in fiscal year 15. Monitoring approaches should focus on sites in which first pilot or full-scale in-situ restoration was conducted as part of an ESTCP demonstration, or any DoD pilot or full-scale in-situ restoration site where sufficient data exists to conduct a thorough evaluation. Our motivation for releasing this solicitation was to gain a greater understanding of the long-term performance of in-situ restoration technologies. DoD has funded many pilot and field-scale demonstrations of in situ remediation technologies over the past 20 years, and most of these projects have performed very careful monitoring and assessment, but generally only over a few months to a few years. So there are still many questions regarding the long-term performance and impacts of these technologies, and these long-term performance issues have rarely been addressed. Despite these legitimate questions regarding long-term performance, we generally have a lack of data from our field sites on the duration of the treatment effects of the various technologies that have been implemented, limited data on the potential for long-term rebound, and we also are not clear on the possibility of continued improvement in water quality after active treatment is ended. We certainly believe that occurs at many of these sites, but lack the data to support that hypothesis. And so under this solicitation, we have the opportunity to develop long-term performance data and to examine the conditions that foster or potentially limit the long-term performance of various in situ technologies. If we are able to collect this data under the projects that would be funded from the solicitation, this would really assist the DoD by reducing risk and costs associated particularly with the more difficult to treat contaminated sites. So the objectives of this solicitation are, number one, to evaluate the long-term performance and impacts of site restoration technologies. Number two is we have specific questions to address that include how long do remediation impacts persist, and what technologies and site conditions are most likely to lead to long-term performance concerns. Specifically for groundwater sites, we also would like to understand how do different groundwater quality parameters change over time, and what mechanisms control long-term groundwater quality. There are very specific site requirements to keep in mind. Proposals must address a specific site. The in situ restoration technologies implemented must have been demonstrated at a DoD site, and they must have sufficient data that's accessible to the proposer to allow for a comparison of monitoring data collected during the demonstration and now, and the proposer must be able to demonstrate that the required data exists. Restoration technologies may have been implemented in situ at the pilot or full scale and must have been initially successful. The site must be accessible for additional monitoring now and has not been substantially disturbed since project completion. Restoration projects may have been conducted in either contaminated groundwater or contaminated aquatic sediments. And restoration activities should have been completed 3 or more years ago. Some important points to keep in mind are that monitoring approaches that are going to be utilized can combine standard and innovative approaches. However, the focus must be on the analysis of the data and comparison to results collected at the completion of the initial demonstration period. Simply submitting a proposal that is to develop a new monitoring technique would not be of interest. Also, the results should provide relevant data to indicate the long-term efficacy of the restoration technology and its impacts on the subsurface environment and groundwater quality. The proposal structure is very similar to that for our standard solicitations. However, I would like to point out a particular key difference. Primarily under the site description section, it's important to clearly define the site and the technology that was initially implemented and include a summary of operational data and major conclusions of the technology, such as was the technology considered a success and what performance data was used to make this determination. You should also include a description and references for previously collected site data. You should state the original demonstration objectives, the scale of the demonstration, duration of the operation, and the status for site access, including any subsequent activities that may have impacted the ability for follow-up monitoring. All of this information is available in the proposal directions. Also with supporting material, again, most of this information is standard from our previous solicitations. I did want to point out, though, the supporting technical data section. This is to be used to provide information about the original technology demonstration, including possible data sheets, figures, excerpts from referenced research from the prior work. I certainly realize there's not enough space to include an exhaustive listing of all the demonstration data, but please do include examples of the original demonstration data that will be available to you. Project requirements: execution of past post-remediation performance assessment. There is project management required, as is standard for all CERTIP and ESTCP projects, including monthly financial reports as well as quarterly progress reports. We are requesting 2 meetings and briefings, an interim review, as well as the final summary presentation. And we are requiring certain deliverables, including the field work plan, as well as the final product and any supporting documentation. Cost and duration of the proposal. This cost and duration is at the discretion of the proposer. However, the expected length of the project is roughly 12 to 18 months. Your proposal must justify the project length and budget that is proposed. We have approximately $2 million total available for projects with multiple awards anticipated. All funding under this solicitation will be distributed as a single increment at the start of the project. All contracts will be firmed fixed price. Federal investigators should plan on obligating all project funds no later than September 30th, 2016. This slide just shows the basic solicitation process. We have released both a federal call for proposals as well as the broad agency announcement call. Under this one, we will receive proposals, and then selections will be made from that initial proposal that is submitted. This table shows you the key solicitation dates, with the solicitation itself released on May 12th. All proposals are due June 11th, 2015 at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Project selection will occur sometime in July of this year, with anticipated awards sometime in August to September of 2015. Selection criteria for these proposals is the very first will be the relevance of pass-fail, that your proposal must meet the criteria of the solicitation and must be relevant to what we are looking for. Most importantly, after the relevance is the technical merit, followed by transition potential, cost of the proposal, and then small business participation for the BAA submitters only. For a competitive proposal, what we are looking for is one that will evaluate the long-term performance and impact of a site restoration technology. Within your proposal, you must show that your site meets the defined requirements as outlined in the solicitation directions. The focus must be on the analysis of data and comparison to results collected at the completion of the initial demonstration period. The results should provide relevant data to indicate long-term efficacy of the restoration technology and its impacts on the subsurface environment and groundwater quality. The proposal also must be technically sound, providing a detailed description of the technology and its applicability for DoD. You should have well-defined objectives and a detailed technical approach. Please see our website for the detailed proposal submittal instructions, as well as a summary of all projects funded by CERTIP and ESTCP. This presentation itself will also be archived on our website within the next few days for you to reference later. This time, I'll turn it over to Deanne for the question and answer period.
Great, thank you. We will answer as many questions as time permits, focusing on those that are generally applicable to all submitters or logistical in nature. Please note that we will not be able to answer questions about specific proposal ideas or technologies during this webinar. If you have a technical question, please contact Dr. Andrew Leeson, whose contact information is in solicitation instructions. So the first question is there a limit to the total cost or duration of the proposal responding to the solicitation?
We do not have hard limits on the cost or duration. However, the proposal must provide support on the rationale for the cost proposed as well as the duration. And we also expect, due to the limitations of funding, that most projects will fall within the 12 to 18-month time frame. And as mentioned during the presentation, we are limited to roughly $2 million total for multiple awards.
Can a proposal submitted to one of the FY16 ESTCP solicitations be considered for funding under this solicitation as well?
We will not move proposals from a solicitation earlier in the year. They must be submitted under this solicitation that's currently open now. So if you have already submitted a proposal, but it appears to be more relevant for this particular solicitation, you should submit another proposal for this solicitation next month.
Will a cost and performance report be required for these ESTCP projects?
We are not requiring a cost and performance report for these projects.
If a proposal has both a federal and a private sector team members, does it matter whether they submit to the BAA or a federal call for proposals?
The project team should decide what makes sense for your proposal in terms of who would lead the project. That is not something we can answer for you. So whoever leads the project, that is then the solicitation you should respond to. There's no advantage really to submitting to one or the other. You should just do what makes sense for your project.
Does a site need to have been remediated as part of a previous CERTIP or ESTCP project if it meets all the other requirements prescribed in the solicitation?
It needs to, it does not need to have been part of a previous CERTIP or ESTCP project. It does need to have been at a DoD site.
Great, thanks. If a project team has more than one site that is a good candidate for post-remediation performance assessment, should separate proposals be submitted for each, or can they be combined into one proposal?
In general, we had envisioned that it would be one site per proposal. However, if there is a case where you have this same technology that was implemented at perhaps more than one site and it makes sense to look at that jointly, that would be acceptable.
Is it possible to submit a proposal without a site identified?
It is not. You must have a site identified.
Can a proposal be submitted even if buy-in from the managers of the targeted site has not yet been identified?
Certainly, it's much preferable that that really gets to the site access issue. We do want to be confident that you will be able to get access to the site. Having said that, a proposal would not be discarded if you don't have that quite yet, but we would need to see that you are well on your way to getting that approval.
Great. The RFP indicates the site must be for a pilot or full-scale test that was initially successful. Will you consider sites using technologies that are successful in one portion of the site but less successful in a different portion of the same site?
Yes, I think that would be acceptable. It could certainly be interesting to see what had happened in the portions where it was less successful initially.
Is this solicitation only for groundwater or sediment remediation? Would surface water cleanup and remediation also be applicable? And what about prior soil remediation efforts?
This solicitation is specific for groundwater or aquatic sediment remediation.
Will sites that are normally private sector but DoD affiliated be allowed for this proposal?
Generally, as long as it is a site where the DoD has been responsible for the remediation, at least the majority of the remediation, then it would be considered.
Are you envisioning a project focusing on a single technology?
Yes, these projects should focus on a single technology.
How important is it to incorporate a tech transfer component in the project?
These are ESTCP projects, and we always consider the tech transfer component to be important. So certainly the proposer should consider the tech transfer of the project information.
Great, thanks. This was the last general question that we have received. There are other questions that are more technology specific. Again, we ask that you contact Dr. Andrew Leeson for those questions. Thank you for attending today's webinar. As a reminder, the presentation and audio will be archived for future reference on the ESTCP solicitation webpage. This concludes today's webcast.